Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. Thank you so much for tuning in every Tuesday on LinkedIn at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Times. You've been extremely loyal. I enjoy your comments. Post your comments in the chat, and we'll go through all the comments and questions that you have as we're speaking. Have you ever wondered why women of color or diverse backgrounds get less support at work? A recent article in Harvard Business Review stated that women of color don't need to be told to lean in. Research shows that most of them have confidence, ambition, determination, and desires. What they don't always have are managers or leaders who understand how to help them overcome all the obstacles that stand in their way. You might also be wondering what this has to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion. This story illustrates that the factors preventing women of color from advancing at work are quite different from those holding white women, with even that of men of color. My name is Rochelle Carrier, and I'm a DEI advocate, and for a living, I help thought-provoking leaders implement DEI plans in their workspace. And if you tune in, not only will you have better insight of our experiences, it will allow room for self-reflection. In our previous episode, we talked about tokenism and how it affected us. My personal share is that double standards and microaggressions, along with unconscious biases, existed throughout my entire career in the workplace, and that is only to name a few. Today, I'd like to introduce you to Sehar Akil. She has 15 years experience in sales and marketing with a focus on the consumer packaged goods industry. Previously, she worked for Fortune 500 companies like UPS and L'Oreal. She has not stopped there. While packing a punch, she is currently working as an e-commerce national sales manager at an international furniture company. Her main focus is advocating for women in the workspace. Also on our panel today is Valerie. She has earned her credentials with a bachelor's degree in English and MBA from FIU. She has never stopped. Today, she runs an airtight e-commerce automation business. Ladies, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice to be here.
Yes.
Oh, it's always amazing to have you wonderful ladies coming on the show because you have such valuable information to share. So Sehar, I'd like to start by, if you can explain to the audience what happened.
Okay, so basically in my previous position, I used to work for L'Oreal, and I had two severe burnouts while working there. It wasn't that I wasn't ambitious or I wasn't good at my job or there wasn't a need to grow. It was that while in that space, while in that environment, it became very apparent that it was highly toxic. And to just overcome the racism, the microaggressions, all the harassments, it became apparent that those weren't anything that HR or upper management were concerned with. A lot of the times where women of color have issues or problems, they're often the one being made to think or gaslighted into thinking that they're the issues. It's only happening to them, and they often just quit or move on. Or what happened with me is I was fired on very baseless reasons because they couldn't really talk about my work or how I treated people. A lot of time people also don't talk about being fired as a good thing, but I proudly say it. It's like, hey guys, I'm Sehar. I was fired from L'Oreal. How are you? What do you do? And from there, I think I just became more aware of um, this issue of gaslighting and tokenism, and microaggression was so much bigger than me. I actually didn't even publicly speak out about it until a year later. Actually, this past summer was the first time I spoke about it, and I just uh, was so hushed into thinking that it was so faux pas speaking about your previous employers or even mentioning their names. And I felt like when I said, hey, L'Oreal, this international company, this international beauty company that, spends so much, like millions and millions of dollars on advertising and, just promoting women of color in their ad campaigns internally and in their head offices. This was not the case. Their their CEOs, board of directors are still predominantly male men. Second is Caucasian females, and it becomes really hard to climb that corporate ladder because it doesn't exist for people of color like me. And yeah, I think to sum it up, that's where I kind of just had to take a step back and absorb everything that I seen and witnessed and just shared my experience. And I was extremely, extremely lucky and completely humbled by the amount of support that I received. Internationally, there were people reaching out to me saying that I used to previously work for L'Oreal or I still work there and I'm receiving the same kind of treatments, or when I was fired, I was also offered some kind of compensation just to shut up about it and not sue them in the future or retaliate in any kind of way. And just the way they said it made it sound really sketchy, to be honest. And I valued my voice and my freedom more than just a random dollar figure that they gave me. So I didn't take it. And a lot of people are like, you know what? Like I took the money I signed and I wish I didn't because I can't publicly talk about them anymore. And if you're
Right.
currently there in your contract, you have to be a loyal employee. So it's kind of like a cult where current employees also can't talk about how they're being treated publicly.
So let me ask you, and Valerie, you can chime in. Do you think that the murder of George Floyd had an impact on where you are today?
I'll go ahead and chime in here a little bit. When I was laid off from a previous position, laid off, I was I think just so exhausted by the entire experience and everything that I had to deal with and just personally come to terms with. I just had to move on, right? I didn't really have a moment to think about what really happened, and what I was facing while I was there. I would definitely say that the murder of George Floyd, unfortunately, for many reasons, but it's almost like I experienced some kind of PTSD. Like everything, all of the memories and everything actually that I've experienced from a racial perspective, just things started to come back, in small pieces. Little things started to come back. And, it was obviously extremely traumatic to witness that and to start to experience and really realize, oh my God, I've experienced racism, like I think that as women of color, we just have so much on our shoulders. We have so many responsibilities as, mothers, partners, daughters, trying to be productive at work, students and all of these different things. It's almost like we just kind of push those things aside. We experience it, but we just bury it deep so we can move on, right? So we can survive, so we can be productive. But they exhibit themselves, or the repercussions of experiencing those behaviors, exhibit themselves in other ways, by ways of a, at least for me, experiencing anxiety, or actually having a shingles outbreak. I mean, I'm relatively young. It's typically the elderly that experience that, and in a prior position, I had actually experienced that a number of times, which is unheard of. So to answer your question, yes, absolutely, absolutely. That played a big role in really thinking about and realizing, just what I've experienced, and my peers,
Right. Did you find that it affected you as well, Sehar, the murder of George Floyd? I mean, okay, let's keep it real. Yes, George Floyd is an African American, and he represented an African American dying
So
he represented an African American dying under the foot of a Caucasian. But it doesn't negate the fact that it affects other people of color and other people of races.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
So
I think that's why there was so much outrage all over the world. People of color all over the world were outraged because they started to think back about, what they experienced.
Right. Right. That's exactly it. So, Sehar, if you can give us your background and let us know how his murder affected you.
So I am Pakistani. I am an immigrant. I came to Canada when I was 9. I've also lived in the US. I lived in Chicago during 9/11. So being a Muslim in in Chicago after 9/11 happened, my family and I experienced all of the racism that came with it, and all of the attacks. And speaking of George Floyd, it didn't matter to me, that he was Black. It mattered to me that he was human, and it mattered that there were people that were privileged enough to think that that was okay. And it did bring me back as to what humanity was. And I think we spoke about it previously, where I also wasn't able to watch the entire video or what happened. I only heard about it. So what really got to me was speaking or hearing his daughter speak, and her talking about why she didn't understand why she was being treated differently just because the color of her skin. Because I remember being 9 and 10 in Chicago, and I didn't understand why people were literally screaming at me and my little sister walking to the park, racist comments, and I didn't understand why I was being treated differently because of the color of my skin. And I think that really, really hit home for me. And I think that's actually close to the time where I had my first burnout with L'Oreal, because I just could not believe that a company who would just post a black square to post a black square, but internally that's not how they were even treating their own employees. And there was so much.
I don't mean to interject, but when you say the black square for the audience, can you let them know what you're referring to?
So on social media, if you were, I feel like it was more so on Instagram, where in June 2020, a lot of companies supporting the Black Lives Matter movement posted a black square, to showing their support for the movement. However, that was just more so for the public. It was just marketing. Internally,
Right.
They did not do anything to support at that time our Black employees, or even just to check in. Like no manager or not a good manager, or more so like checked in on their employees to see how they were feeling, if they impacted them. Um, so just even speaking on that, there was no internal memo saying, hey, we support this. If you need help, we're here for you guys. So it was just kind of just apparent that it was more so marketing than actual actions behind their words. And I think for me at that time, I was working 60 plus hours a week. And I think why I had my burnout so intensely was because I realized, like, why am I literally killing myself? Because I was. I think I lost 4 pounds in one week after the George Floyd incident. And I was like, why am I working so hard for a company, literally crying between meetings or trying to keep face,
Keep it together.
keep it together for a company that doesn't even care about their employees, right? And at that time, one of their big campaigns they were doing is stand up for street harassment, and I was actually the face of their internal campaign, saying, being like stand up for street harassment. But I'm thinking to myself, I'm thinking to myself, how could you say that you are behind standing up for street harassment where you couldn't even stand up for somebody dying in broad daylight? You're not even standing up for me, like an employee who was really excellent at her job, being like, hey, like, I'm suffering. I need a break. Like, this is too many hours. I need help. And there was no help done, or there was nothing done.
I guess that's what's so bothersome as well, is just the blatant hypocrisy. And I think that's why, shows like this and coming out and speaking out against these things, and really just, sharing experiences, right? Because I think that in doing that, it'll, like cause someone to really think about their current position or why it is that they're feeling that way.
Right.
It seems kind of naive and maybe even a little bit like ignorant on my part, but I guess, we're just trying to make it, right? We just want to get to our job. We just want to do what we need to do. And, we see these things, something doesn't feel right, but we've got responsibilities. So we just keep pushing. We just keep pushing. We just keep pushing, not really realizing that, oh my God, I'm experiencing racism. I'm experiencing, microaggressions and all of these detrimental things that, are so impactful on your mental health, on your self-esteem, on your self-worth. I know that I experienced, all of those things, really second guessing myself, not feeling as confident as I used to. But, in retrospect, and thank God I work for myself now. I plan to always have my own business moving forward. A couple of things. Thank God I was not working in corporate at that time, because I think that we would be having a very different conversation if I was in such a callous environment, after having witnessed, what happened to George Floyd. I mean, it's just no words.
Right.
That's number one. Number two, in being able to cultivate my own business, and use my strengths and experience, I think that, I'd like to speak more. And that's why I'm so happy that Rochelle has this platform to really encourage women to, people of color in general, to do their own thing, to gain that confidence,
Right. It's these courageous and critical conversations need to be had in order for for everybody to be educated and to become more aware and self-aware as well, to be able to have the emotional intelligence to say, am I biased Do I have implicit biases? Do I have unconscious biases? What is it that I am thinking when someone other than me or doesn't look like me walks through that door? So it poses a completely different, question when you're actually questioning yourself. And I think even more so is that, when we don't have the support that we need to be able to lean in and to be able to, go through these obstacles, then, like both of you and myself as well, I had a burnout myself in February. Those could be prevented.
Oh, absolutely. These
Right?
conversations affect, well, hopefully should, affect some kind of change, even in a couple of people. I mean, that's where it starts, having the difficult conversations, the uncomfortable conversations, bringing these things to light. Because I think for too long, it's just, well, that's the way it is. I've had people say that to me before. I'm at an event and I hear a racist comment and I'm taken aback by it. But someone else says, oh, well, that's just the way it is. Well, that's just the way it is. Well, the way it is not right. It's not right. It's unacceptable. It has to be spoken about. And I've certainly become a lot more vocal about that. For too long, it's just about trying to survive, getting to work, accomplishing these goals, trying to be the model employee and everything like that. But meanwhile, you're being disrespected.
Yeah.
You're not, you're not being promoted. You're not being, you're not being seen. You're not being heard. And it's just, it's debilitating.
It's interesting. That's quite alarming because, according to a McKinsey and leanin.org study, says, they are less likely to have bosses, or you and I, all of us, are less likely to have bosses who promote our work contributions to others, help them navigate organizational politics, or socialize with them outside of work. Thus, they're often left out of all informal networks that propel most high potential forward in their careers. They lack the kind, and this is threading from what you're saying, Valerie, they lack the kind, and again, I'm quoting this from the McKinsey and Company report. They lack the kind of meaningful mentorship and sponsorship that is critical for getting ahead.
Right.
So not only does it stop you from getting ahead, but it keeps you on the bottom.
Yep.
And instead of coming up for air, you're always trying to survive and not thrive.
Yep.
You're undervalued.
Constantly.
Right.
Yeah. It's like drinking water from a fire hose. You can never, you're just always struggling, always trying to come up for air, always, and no matter what you do, at least in my experience in a previous organization, it's obvious that I was targeted for whatever reason. They just decided they didn't like me.
Right.
And literally, no matter what I did, it wasn't good enough. If I proposed a project would be done in 3 months and got it done in 30 days, no acknowledgement, and just the harassment, the bullying, you know what I mean? It's just, and I know, and I have absolutely no doubt that it was because of my race. I have no doubt at all, because there were people in positions higher than I was who were, and I can honestly, I can be fair and give people credit when credit is due. But there are, I can think of several who were grossly incompetent, being promoted year after year after year. And, why was that? They weren't people of color.
There's so much gaslighting that happens that no one ever talks about, that makes women of color feel and think that they're so small when they aren't. So that's why when I go back to it, I really talk about my work and how good I was, because it just did not make sense for the treatment otherwise. And I think when people, when women like us women, we say, "Hey, I know this," and people are like, "Oh no," they give us maybe 30 more reasons why that might not be the case, but be like, "But what if it is?" And people are like, "Well, that's just too horrible to think about." And I think people just,
And that's the problem.
yes, that's the problem. They don't want to think about it.
They're minimizing the truth.
Yeah.
Minimizing.
Yes. And I think that's when, even when you spoke about being heard, I just remember finally speaking out about L'Oreal, that this is how I was being treated. And so many people just, from Malaysia, L'Oreal USA, L'Oreal Mexico, just reaching out to being like, hey, I believe you. Just saying that was, I can't give you guys the words. Like, it was just so affirming, being like, wow, I'm finally being heard. Like, people finally believe me. I'm not just being gaslighted to think that it was me,
Right.
just, as to Valerie's point of feeling like you're not good enough because you're exceeding all these goals, but it's never good enough.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think there's some clues to that, right? When considering working with a particular company, there are certainly some clues. And, in hindsight, when you look at the leadership structure, that speaks volumes. That speaks volumes. If I were to go back to corporate, which I'm not, I'm not doing that. I'm working like night and day to, avoid that ever happening again. But, what I would say to people of color and considering an organization, look at the structure. Does anybody look like you? If not, you may be in, for some tough times.
Right. There is a lack of representation.
Mhm.
And, to go back to, I love Harvard Business Review. They have, the most amazing, they do a lot of research, and, to bring that, your point under, under the light, it says, managers are unconscious when they're looking for employees or sponsors, and that what they do is that they apply exactly what I was saying before. They apply does the person look like me? Not me, myself as Rochelle, but does it look like them as the manager? So they search for people like them with similar life experiences. And while this is all human nature, it says it can also reinforce existing gender and racial biases. Right?
Right.
So that's why there is a lack of representation. And, in the first book that I'll be releasing, it talks about emotional intelligence. And like I was saying at the beginning of the show, if you're cognizant of seeing someone who is, it could just be, it can only be, or it could actually be anytime in your life. It could be, a situation in the grocery store. It could be a situation in the workplace. It could be a situation among your social setting. What thoughts are coming to my mind when I see this person that doesn't look like me? Right. And then right, Valerie, you wanted to say something.
Right. Well, yeah, I think it's important for organizations, in particular, to get people to, think in that way, right? But that takes a responsible, conscious organization, to have exercises and to have trainings, so people can think about these things. It's natural for us to gravitate towards people that look like us or who are similar to us. But, in the corporate environment, And especially if you want to have a company that's inclusive, you have to force people and have exercises that cause them, that bring them to a point where they're thinking about these things, and also to have diverse management, So it's not just one person looking one way, hiring people that look exactly like them. Or how are we ever going to get to the point of diversity? I know in one of my last positions, every board meeting, I think it was me and one other, person of color. It was never more than, one or two of us at a time.
Right.
When you look at the managers and the directors and who's doing the hiring, they didn't look like me.
Right.
They didn't look like me, so.
And I just want to mention that because a lot of people think that it's only the managers or the CEOs, but a lot of times people don't realize, okay, well, what does the HR structure also look like?
Yes.
Because those also play like a really good role in your promotion, your salary, your benefits. If you're able to move internationally in any ways. I know the person that I had complaints about in HR. He's still there. They didn't change him. They promoted him. So it's not like the structure is changing. It's just those people are no longer in their positions because they get promoted. So who are they going to hire underneath are people like them that they're able to manage like them. And
right.
That's why
they perpetuate negative behavior.
Exactly. And yeah.
It's crazy how the human mind works just to be able to survive. But I had a conversation with a former colleague who brought up several instances of blatant racism at a former company, and brought it to HR's attention. They did nothing. The employee who was making the inappropriate comments was never even reprimanded. Nothing. As a matter of fact, that employee outlasted most of the department that I was in, because a lot of us ended up leaving or were laid off or whatever. And that employee, who was incredibly racist and inappropriate, outlasted all of us. That makes no sense. And it's unacceptable. But you brought up a good point about human resources, and I had just pushed those things to the wayside. I forgot about so many negative experiences, and it wasn't until this show, having different conversations, speaking with former colleagues, that I'm like, wow, that really did happen, didn't it?
Yeah.
That really did happen.
Yeah. I just want to mention, if someone is watching, they're in this position right now to document everything. If you're able to, whenever you're going to see an HR, make sure that you write, hey, this is the conversation we're going to be having, and take notes during the meeting, and then send it right after. Be like, hey, I just want to say that this was the issues that were discussed. This is what you said. This is what I said. And these are the next steps. And please, and also to put a date on that. Be like, I would like to have this taken care of between this time, because then HR, they will drag it on, just hoping that you forget or that you leave, because it's not in their best interest to cause commotion within a team or within a manager and their employee. So if they can stay out of it, just sweep it under the table, they will. And I also want to mention that if you do actually have a concern and you do have proof of it, always also contact your labor board as well. Even if you're still contacting HR, contact the labor board as well, because the labor board is actually on your side, whereas HR, they're on the company and manager side.
They're protecting the employer.
Exactly. So,
the employee.
Sorry, go on,
Yeah.
Rochelle.
No, go ahead.
So that's just when you think, when I think back about my studies in business and you think of the union, where the union has, backing of their employee, whereas, the labor board has a backing of you when you're in corporate situations, because you really don't have anyone else that can speak for you at that point.
Right. There was an interesting, I had a meeting like I do with all of you on Zoom, and it was with a guest, and she is a woman of color, worked for HR, and she was the one suffering all the gaslighting, microaggressions
In HR.
in HR. So the flip side to this story is that she filed a lawsuit. It was a Fortune 500 company. And because she knew the rules and the law, she won the lawsuit.
Yeah.
And then she resigned. So I think it's very important, like you said, Sehar, to also contact the labor union, but to also know your rights. We hopefully will have. I'm in the talks with an attorney and a lawyer on our rights as employees. And I think once women know their rights and are well equipped with the resources that we need and the support around us, then we can, take our cases to a higher level so that things like that won't happen again in the future, because you're opening the door for someone else to say, okay, this is what I need to do and this is who I need to contact in order for my rights to be protected as an employee.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And even, sorry, go on.
It's hard.
No. So I was just going to say, even if they have an employee manual of things that you can or cannot do, they don't really have things to say, oh, well, if you experience this issue, contact this person. They're just like, talk to your manager, talk to HR, they will take care of it. So it's really not for the employees at all. It's more so to cover themselves legally, being like, we have these things in place. How can you accuse us of being, racist or of harassment when we have these policies and it's in our policy manual?
Yeah. I think that's part of not really, knowing your rights. I also think that it's part of a bigger issue too. I think a lot of times when you get to, when you're in a toxic environment or you're in, a toxic organization, it's almost like you start to experience, it's like you're just trying to survive. These people are paying your paycheck. You have all of these responsibilities. You're trying to survive. And even though you have a basic understanding of the law, I mean, I'm not an attorney, but I have an MBA, right? So I know that there are, federal laws that protect, employees from certain things. But I think that when you're in an environment that's so toxic and you've been so beaten down, it's almost like you just start to forget these things. It's like you start to experience, there's a name for it, this hostage syndrome.
Stockholm syndrome.
Stockholm syndrome. It's almost like you start to experience Stockholm syndrome because you're dependent on these people for your livelihood, but at the same time, you're being treated this way. So it just becomes a very toxic mix. So I think that that's another reason why it's important for women of color to stay dialed in to conversations like these, and keep these things top of mind and these feelings, or any experience that they're having in their work environment of feeling uncomfortable, that there are resources that they can go out and say, or go out and look to and know that there's a term for it. I never really understood microaggressions. I didn't realize that's what I was experiencing until I started to have the conversations and more information came out. So, it's it's tough. It's tough all around. It's tough all around. But I do think that platforms like this are really making people think about what they're experiencing.
Right. What would you do in hindsight, Valerie?
Oh my gosh. In hindsight, I would have filed a lawsuit. In hindsight, I would have filed a lawsuit. Yeah, a couple of organizations. I would have filed a lawsuit. I should have filed a lawsuit.
A couple,
Yeah,
not just one.
not just one, a couple. I would have filed a lawsuit.
That speaks volumes because we spend, like you said, Sehar, 60, 70 hours in the workspace.
Yeah.
That's 3/4 of our life. And when you said a couple of them, then that compounds to our mental health, on our mental health.
Right.
Hence the reason why, like you said, you had the shingles, something that's completely unheard of. Twice. I remember.
Yeah. 60-year-olds get shingles.
60-year-olds get shingles.
Okay. Yeah. Twice in a year and a half. It's unheard of.
It is unheard of.
Yeah. It's unheard of. Insomnia, anxiety, foul moods. I mean, you name it. Depression. I mean.
And it impacts, Sehar, I see you shaking your head. It definitely impacts on how we show up.
Yes.
It definitely impacts on the preconceived ideas that they all have about us. So, when it's time for us to show up, we show up with all these anxieties already because it either happened in a prior workplace or in a workplace before that. And then all it does is pile one on top of the other. So how you're shaking your head. And I know, we talked about this, on one of our private chats. So, mental health is something I've been through it. Do I go through it as much as I used to? No, because like Valerie says, I'm working for myself and this doesn't even actually feel like work because I'm serving you. I'm serving you as an audience. I'm serving women of color. And this is information that, that needs to be brought to light. So these panels are, like we've said repeatedly throughout the show, these panels are extremely important. So going back to mental health, Sehar, I'll give this to you, besides you burning out, I mean, did you experience what Valerie experienced?
Yes, and I would agree, multiple organizations. I have worked for another corporate 500 as well. It was UPS, and over there I experienced sexual harassment, and that's why I had to quit. So I would completely, agree with her where it's just multiple, multiple degree of disrespect that women of color have to go through. And I think that we burn out so much quicker than I guess white males who might do it at the age of 40, where we are burning out in our early 20s, late 20s, early 30s, because we've just had enough and we've just experienced so much more. Speaking about just working for yourself and, just having that peace of mind is something that I want to work towards as well. And I think having or knowing people that they're able to do that and make a living, and that there is better or different situations, I think just makes me feel better that, hey, like being a corporate badass or being a CEO, maybe that's not what I want to aspire to. Maybe my life, calling is to work for myself and to be the best person that I can be. It's funny because I looked at a lot of powerful male CEOs or just founders of companies, and
Right.
it really just said they might have finished university or some side of college, and then their next position was just CEO, and that was their entire life. And I was like, okay, like if you look at Gates, his literally like his one title is CEO, and that was it. If you look at the founder of Facebook, CEO, that's it. So why do we need to go through, tens and millions of positions to get to where we want to be? You know, and I think just unthinking some of those, structural biases that we were brought up with, where we need to work for somebody else to make a living, and just kind of experiencing new things and experiencing new beliefs and new learnings. I think that's really important, and it just builds you back up, whereas others might bring you back down.
Well, I mean, I'll certainly say working for yourself has different stressors, right? I mean, there's going to be some element of stress, but it's different, to have, the stress of finding new clients versus the stress of, walking into an organization and not knowing what you're going to experience today, not knowing if you're going to have a job. I mean, that's a whole different set of stressors, so not to say that things have been easy, but the stress that I'm experiencing working for myself is certainly more manageable than, for another organization where you just don't know what's going to happen from one day to the next.
Right.
I think from that you're also able to treat people the way that you want to be treated, or the way that you wish that you were treated before. And I think that's a really big part of me, of where I see myself in the future, where I don't want to feel like this again, right? I don't want to feel like I'm being harassed, or that I'm being gaslighted, or that I'm not valued. Sorry,
Right.
Michelle.
You want to be in a safe space.
Yes.
You want to be in a safe space. And we don't realize how unsafe it is until we get there. Because we're pretty good at interviews. I think we're pretty head on and excel when it comes to the interviews. And you get a perception of someone when you're in the interview. And if it's a referral, then you trust the person who's referring you to
Yes.
be right, based on what you see, until you're actually exhibiting all these different situations and realizing the psychological trauma that you're experiencing.
Right. Yeah, I mean, when in the interview process, everybody brings their best face, and it's not until you're in it and you're really in it, you start to see things that are uncomfortable. I think I mentioned in the previous show, and I'll mention it again because I know we have some new viewers, but it was so uncomfortable at the time, and really realizing what happened now is just even more troubling. There was a situation where there was a VP who was, extremely loud, always loud in the office, and everybody just thought it was extremely funny. No one ever told him to, keep it quiet, bring his voice down, or anything like that. And then one day, a woman of color, she laughed, I guess, just a little bit too loud. And another VP ran out of the office to her manager to tell the manager that she had to reprimand her because we're not that kind of company, that she's being way too loud, and we're not that kind of company. So I remember at the time thinking, my God, that's ridiculous. But in thinking of it and really putting the pieces together now, I'm like, wow, this is what happened. This is what really happened. So nobody wanted to hear her. No, but that's the message. That was the symbolism in realizing it now. Nobody wanted to hear her, what she had to say. She was being silenced. She couldn't even laugh. I mean,
It's colonialism at its best. It's a modern form of colonialism.
Yep. Yeah. It was triggering at the time. And it wasn't until, recently, obviously, like we've spoken about everything that happened with George Floyd and a lot of the conversations that, started to erupt as a result of that, that I thought of that moment. I just pushed it way down deep, because we have to keep on keeping on, right? We have got to survive. We've got to show up. We've got to, we've got responsibilities. I always go back to that. And we forget these things so we can cope.
Right.
And I thought about it and I was like, wow, it was like a moment. It symbolized exactly what was going on there. If you're a person of color, you be quiet. Basically.
That's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is. Yeah. There's a former company or school, probably several of them. Like you mentioned, Valerie. Now I'm being triggered because I'm realizing there were several of them. But one in particular where I remember, and it's not to say all of the schools, but several of them. I did have some good experiences at schools where the principals were of color. Mm. And the whole game shifted.
Right.
Completely shifted. Mm-hmm. I had access, and this is a school back in Montreal. It was a French school. The principal was Caribbean, and it was the first time in my life, and I was already 30, where I had someone in upper management or leadership role who was Black. And I had access to all the resources. I was included in all the meetings. I was considered for all the promotions. I had treatments that I had never been exposed to. So interestingly enough, it made me feel uncomfortable. And then I remember her coming into my classroom, literally, not to observe, but to see what I needed. What is it that you need? We have a budget. This is the budget that we have. You have X amount of money that you can spend in a classroom.
How refreshing was that? But I'm sure it's uncomfortable, like you said, at the same time, because you're not used to it.
Absolutely. And the flip side at other schools where I've been at, we don't have a budget for the classroom. I had I'll never forget this. It was 95 degrees, literally Fahrenheit outside. And they told me they didn't have a budget for the AC unit. So I had an AC unit that was leaking Freon on the ground that was never cleaned. They said they didn't have the budget to replace it. And if I needed anything, I had to come out of pocket. And that if I didn't do that, then my job was on the line. So I would come out of pocket. The principal told me that. She said, if I do not do what is required of me to do, clean the floor, so I wouldn't fall, so my students wouldn't fall, bring in my own fan, get my own resources and my tools to make learning more, easier and accessible for the students, then they wouldn't renew my contract.
Wow. Yeah.
And so there's that, like you said, it's a Stockholm syndrome. I'm like, okay, so I'm going to scrub the floor. I'm going to bring my fan in.
Yes.
Because they don't want me to complain too much or say too much. They want to silence you.
Well, and you don't want to say too much either. It's almost like you've become conditioned. I don't want to be the problem.
Right. I don't want to ruffle the feathers.
Yeah. Well, they make you feel like you're just lucky to be there. Why are you complaining? That was one of my meetings with HR. Is just they specifically told me that I was in the top 3, or I shouldn't be complaining about my pay because I was the third highest person being paid. And I was like, but who are the first 2? Because I know I'm here the longest. No.
Yep.
That
Yep.
shouldn't be it. I'm not just, being happy of just being here. It's just, no, I want what I'm valued. And just, with Rochelle, just feeling valued and being like, oh my God, that there's somebody there for me, that there's someone that supports me.
It's
I think
support.
I think it's just the support. Um, I completely understand. Like, I can completely relate to. And I'm so
It's
sorry that you had to go through that. And I think I just want to mention that I know that I am a woman of color and I'm brown, but when the George Floyd incident happened, I think it was more shocking to me. It's just the sadness that everyone, because I have a lot of friends that are Black, the sadness that they felt. And for me, all I could do is just reach out and say I'm sorry to people, and if they needed my support. And I think that in any time, any of these situations happen, um, all you can do is just be there and offer your support in any way possible. Just even saying that, hey, um, I can never, be where you are. Like, I'm sorry. I know that there was people of color that were darker than me. They're more of a visible minority than I am, and I just felt like I was privileged enough that I can still like blend in with the beiges, you know. So it was a thing. Like, I worked in cosmetics, and it was just, well, you're beige or you're not. And I could still blend in with the beiges, and I still had that sense of mourning.
I don't even think the blending in exists anymore. I
No.
think that the last administration kind of made it clear that there's two streets. There's one street and then there's the brown street. And if you're brown, you're Black. If you're Black, you're very Black. And I feel like, things have kind of really shifted, to that. And I think that that's why the George Floyd incident was so poignant for everyone.
Oh, it rippled around the whole entire global
Yeah.
community.
Yep. Whether you were, African American or brown or what have you. I think that was such a defining, a defining moment.
There's somebody who said, very enlightening and inspiring conversation. She said, also to Valerie, she said, you're right about feeling undervalued and unappreciated. And there's another interesting comment here. Lynn says, colonialism, that is a good word to describe how domineering a culture we have to work in sometimes. And still, as women of color, we rise and many thrive. So,
We rise and thrive, but sometimes it's at what cost?
right.
Our mental health, breakdowns, burnouts. I mean, Sehar, you're much younger than me, and my God, to hear that you've experienced burnouts. I mean, it's just, you don't even have children yet, I don't think. I mean, it's a lot once you start to pile on those responsibilities. It takes burnout to a whole other level. So,
Right.
Yeah, that's why I just say that I'm privileged in the sense that you're right. Like, I don't have these additional responsibilities, and like, I can still at least care for myself and only myself. And I think it just took me to that point where, wow, if I don't take care of myself now, I might not able to have kids, because I might not be able to be mentally there. And being burnouts, you do go through depressions. And I literally had, I feel like text messages or, some kind of thing being like, hey, if anything ever happened to me, blame L'Oreal, because I just was on the brink of suicide at points.
yeah.
So, yeah.
Suicide.
Suicide. Because of L'Oreal. I literally wrote suicide notes being like, hey, if anything ever happens to me, blame L'Oreal. And still I was silenced. Like I still didn't say anything. I didn't say anything publicly. I was just, hey, if something ever does happen, just know that it was because of this corporation and no one else.
So, okay, so we need to be clear. So you said when you say suicide, what exactly do you mean? What were your thoughts? Were your thoughts of despair? Were your thought, what were your, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but what were your thoughts?
It was just that nothing's ever going to get better. At that point, I had been talking to HR. I had been talking to the diversity communications, the ethics communications, any sort of person that you could talk to.
Wait a second. There was a diversity communications department at L'Oreal?
Yes. But the person who was the member or the person that they put in charge, she didn't have a background of diversity and inclusion. Like I knew she came from like a service background, so I didn't feel comfortable talking to her because I didn't feel like she understood. There was no person in HR I could speak to. I specifically asked them for a person of color in HR management that I could speak to. They had nobody there. They just promoted a token person on the ethics commission, but again, he was a lawyer and he specifically told me, he's like, just so you know, I do work for L'Oreal. Like there were so many things that are just, that's why I said,
I'm not on your side.
Exactly. So there was just, that's why I say whenever you're making a complaint, make sure you also involve the labor board, because the HR, like anyone internally, they're not there for you. They're there for what's best for the company.
Right.
And it's easier for them to pluck you out than to make an an internal change, right? To make any kind of changes in their policy,
right.
Because that makes them reflect that, oh, we might have been doing something wrong, and they will never say it.
Right. So, let's go back to, you said you had the thoughts. So what was it? What was it that you were feeling? And then how did you, or is it still a process? And how are you overcoming what you had gone through in terms of being suicidal?
Well, I think just mental health is always a process. I think my thoughts were, this is never going to get better. I just felt so unheard. And I was doing everything by the book. They're like, contact this person, contact that person. I was still working 60 hours. On additional, I had to take this on as well. So it was just a lot. And I basically had to lie to my own friends, because I know a lot of bloggers, and they would be like, oh, what is L'Oreal doing internally for the Black Lives Matter? And I just couldn't say anything to them because I know deep down that it was all fake. And I think with that sense of loss in purpose, where I'm like, why am I working 60 hours? I'm not being heard.
Loss in purpose. So you didn't feel you no longer had a purpose.
Yeah, I didn't have a purpose there anymore. I felt like any change that I put forward, or any kind of resolutions that I put forward, was just
shut down.
It was just shut down, and there was no movement for better.
And when did you realize that those were the thoughts that you were having? Was it before you were fired? It was
definitely after my second burnout, just because I went back being really thinking, hey, I want to see if it was actually the workload, or was it the environment that put me to a burnout? Because you're never fully honest with yourself when you're in that position, because you're just gaslighted so much. So you begin to think, it's like, wait, am I crazy? Did that actually happen? Was it my workload, or was it just me? So when I went back, it became very apparent that it was a toxic environment in a toxic company. And after my second burnout, where I've gone through all the revenues of talking to HR, talking to managers, having meetings, making sure the meetings are recorded, having all this proof on how I was being treated, yet they still said, yeah, all of your complaints are unfounded. And at that point, it's just like, what do you do? And at that point, I'm just like, if something ever happened to me, like blame L'Oreal, because I don't know what else I could have done in this position. And I think the feeling of so helplessness.
Right. So helplessness and lack of purpose, because you really spent, like we said earlier, 3/4 of your life giving, or maybe even more. Because I remember you saying that you worked many, many, many hours, like you said earlier. And so that lack of purpose, because you basically gave them your all, and you reached out to get support or have an advocate to be able to support you, and that was being shut down as well. So where are you now in your process?
So currently, I am taking a break. I am spending some time re-energizing my purpose for myself, and not at a place. I'm actually no longer um, uh, working in a corporate world. This month, I told everyone that I'm spending time on me, which means um, re-educating myself in new processes, new learnings, taking space for mental health, so talking to a therapist, spending time with my family and loved ones, and also realizing that it's okay to take a break. I think since I've started working 15 years ago, I've never really paused and had a moment where I've just
Reflected.
reflected. And I think just
Came up for air.
yeah, and like the first thing I told my therapist this week, I was just like, I'm tired. You know? I'm tired emotionally. I just need a break. Um, and I think just realizing that it's okay to say that. And that's why I'm talking about it out loud, because a lot of people are like, oh, well, if you don't have a job, when are you going to look for another job? Are you interviewing? Are you doing this?
Yeah.
Are you doing that? Where are you? And calm down. I'll get there. I know we all have responsibilities, but I feel like right now my responsibility is to myself, where I can be my more selfish self.
Or
um,
authentic self.
yeah, authentic self. And um, actually thinking about what I want to do next, and doing it with some sort of um, degree and passion, instead of just blindly taking another opportunity where I might not be happy in. And yeah.
That's oh, what were you gonna
No,
say?
no, I wanted you to speak.
No, I was gonna say that's very important. Unfortunately, I kind of realized this and figured it out too late. But even before, I decided to go off on my own, and not decided to. That was kind of decided for me, but I was planning those things anyway. I had already planted the seeds. I started to think about, when was I the happiest? Not when I was making the most money, not none of that. When was I the happiest, and what exactly was I doing? And when I thought about it, and I thought about e-commerce and, a private label brand that I had, and, doing work in that space, I realized that was the moment that I was the happiest. And I feel like when you put your authentic self into anything, you're going to become successful. You will be successful and you will thrive. And if I could go back way to the beginning of my career, where that passion of what I really loved kind of shifted, because we hear our parents' voices. Well, you should do this, or you have to go to business school to do this, and you can't do that. There's so much noise where you're not able to really make a decision from a place of passion and purpose. So I think that it's great that you're doing that, that you're giving yourself that time. I'm happy that whatever happened led me to where I am now, because I am doing something that I'm very passionate about. But I think that that's so important, to be able to just take a little bit of time and really veer towards what makes you happy, what gives you passion, what gives you purpose.
What gives you purpose?
What gives you purpose? What gives you purpose?
That's huge, because it's interesting. It's an interesting, what gives you purpose?
Mm-hmm.
I think once you are your authentic self and you're aware of what it does to you to feel purposeful, then you can reach out and
Right.
look for the alignment that you're looking for in the corporate space or in a different space. It could be
Right.
artistic, it could be an array of things.
Yeah.
And exactly what you're doing right now, Sehar, is that's exactly it. In February, I had my burnout. I literally cried for 4 weeks. I didn't know what I was going to do and where I was going. And then little by little, I was finding my purpose. What is it that I can do? And then opportunities were coming. I had a clarity coach. Then I saw a therapist, and I was gathering everybody around me that was going to be supportive, friends, and then just opening up and letting them know. Again, we're a culture, Black and brown, because I have a friend who's Pakistani, and she says the same thing. She's also Muslim, and she says the same thing. We don't air our dirty laundry, but it's not dirty.
Yeah.
It's something that's crucial to who we are as people.
Right.
Mental health goes with physical health. They coexist. They're not separate from each other. But because that culture, our culture, states that it's not something to be spoken about, then when are we going to look for the help? So once, like you said, you voice, and you're here on the panel, you're voicing how you feel, and we're simply having this conversation, allows you to hear yourself say what you're saying, so that you can come to a better place once you're reflecting, or as you're reflecting, right? Because now, you said you're doing research, you're reading, you're taking time for yourself, and you're not listening to the naysayers. The naysayers, go back to work. When are you going back to work? Oh, but you need to do this. And you're like, whoa, I need to take care of myself first. I can't do any of these things if I can't show up being myself.
Yeah.
Right? She said again, Lynn, she said, purpose is very necessary in life. So once you know your purpose, then you are the one who's going to choose. And we do that in our personal relationships. It's probably going to be a whole other show for this, but we cannot let them choose us. We need to choose who we want to be with.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right? And it's the same thing in work.
Absolutely.
It's not the first job that comes along that we need to say yes to.
Yep.
We need to vet them. Because we know that we're going to have a seat at the table. And if we don't have a seat at the table, then you can walk away.
Mm-hmm.
That's huge.
That's huge.
But there's so many layers to getting there, having that confidence, having the support. It all goes back to really like having that confidence. I think that because we're surrounded by so much negativity and experiencing so much of it, it's hard to have confidence to walk into a place and say, okay, do I want you? We let them choose us. We let them choose us when it really should be the other way around. So, I think, and I hope, I think that maybe the younger generation, I look at my son, who has such an incredibly strong personality and so confident, even, for a toddler, and I'm encouraging that. I think that things are going to start to shift. I hope.
Right. And I believe it will. And like you said, and we've talked about this in other shows, Sehar, if I'm sure you've tuned into some of them, and some of the things that I took out were, that's what we said, we have to teach our girls. We have to teach our girls and boys
and our Black and brown boys
about self-confidence.
Yep.
The confidence to walk away, the confidence to say no, even to an adult. Even to an adult. You know, did we have that confidence when we were growing up? We were being told what to do left and right, how to do it, when to do it. And that's a preconditioning we already have from early childhood. Go clean your room, go do this, go do that. And then growing up, you're thinking, oh, okay, you know what? You're actually giving your power away because you're not actually making those decisions for yourself, even as an adult.
Mm-hmm.
You know, to be able to have those choices and to be able to, like Valerie said, and like Sehar was saying, is the confidence, the self-worth, you know, that I pray that it's going to be a little bit different for my daughter. Sometimes I hesitate, but again, I have to go back and think it's from the confidence. You know, she has a seat at the table, she has her voice, she has conversations with adults. You know, we don't shush her at the table. We don't tell her she's speaking too loud because that's where it starts. You know, I never tell her she's speaking or she's laughing too loud. That's where it starts. You know, we have to be able to allow them to be who they are so that they can bring their authentic self into the real world.
Yeah.
Right? Valerie, you stress about, you know, Black and brown boys. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I encourage my son to, you know, voice his opinions, to sit at the table with us, to have conversations with adults, to feel included, you know, to also be respectful. You know, I'm a little old fashioned for certain things, to also be respectful, but you know, he's not going to be railroaded. I can tell you that much. Nobody's going to railroad him.
Oh, he was railroading me.
Yeah.
He was telling me exactly. It was interesting. Just a side note. It was very interesting. I was, you know, we were at Valerie's and we went to visit her family, and we were outside, and he said, you know, can I go pick up the sticks? And I looked at him just like this. I'm like, sticks? Why do you want me to pick up the sticks? And he looked at me and he said, I'm building a campfire. And I thought, okay, I'm going to go get those sticks because he needs to build this campfire.
Oh my God.
And I literally walked down the street in the heat and I grabbed those sticks and I said, well, what do you want me to do with them? And he looks at me. He's like, why are you looking at me that way? Yeah.
He's like, get to work.
Get to work. Exactly. And, you know, for me, that is not disrespect. That's not disrespect. Other adults might see it that way. For me, that shows you know what you want. You're clear on your vision. You're purposeful because you're getting other people to help you do the work that needs to be done. And I'm going to go on my bike right now. Like he told me, he literally told me he's going on his bike and to make sure that those sticks were going to be there when he came back.
I did not know all this. Dear God.
Did you negotiate a salary? Like,
almost. He was this close. He was this close to negotiating a salary. Those are the next steps. Negotiating salaries.
And you know, to bring it all together, it's those little things.
Yeah.
You know, it's those little things. That's where it starts.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Ladies, it was wonderful. So my keynote is that while I tried to limit my own bias as much as possible by interviewing only women who I did not know and sticking to the same set of questions for ongoing interviews, it is impossible to remove my own personal experience from this discussion. Without it, I would have not been able to undertake this in the first place. The continual theme surfaced is that if true equality in the workplace is what we are here or after, sooner or later, we will have to tackle the issues that are distinctive to us, and especially in the workplace. We need to recognize we are not alone. I know many of you are having courageous and transparent conversations. You're having dialogues with your families, people around you, and you're trying to figure out how you feel about all this. You must ponder that change starts within us. How you solve or resolve those questions will be distinctive to you as women of color and of diverse backgrounds. Oh, someone said something very interesting here. I need to read this before we continue. I totally agree. This is why I'm choosing to raise my child as a world changer and affirm daily that he is so valuable and that he embeds a voice and choice in a lot of areas, especially in my role as an autism mom.
Bravo.
And so that's an invisible disability. No one will know. But if she raises him, like she says, as a world changer and affirms daily that he is valuable, then he will go very far.
Yeah. Look at Elon Musk. He came out recently and spoke about that. So
you have to enlighten me. What did he speak about?
Elon Musk, he mentioned, I believe, and I could be mistaken, but I'm pretty sure he mentioned having some form of autism. Elon Musk. And look at him. My God. So yeah, it just all starts at home, building the confidence.
It does. It really does. And giving them responsibilities so that they understand what to be accountable for. But go through the process, reach out, post your comments on LinkedIn. What's crucial is that you go through the process. And while enough of us just do that, over time, we will continue having a united front. Transparency and authenticity, which we were clear about, being authentic is key. We need to be true to ourselves. We can fundamentally create that transformation. We can move mountains, take your drawbacks, and turn it around into something others find valuable. Give yourselves grace. I know that's a new thing between Valerie and I. Grace. And Sehar, you're included in the circle because grace means what you're doing now.
Yeah.
You're giving yourself the space to be able to reflect on your terms. That's what grace is. So we must continue having these courageous conversations about DEI. Where these dialogues will take us, we don't know, but at least we're here to share and help. Thank you again. Share your comments and feedback. This has been another epic moment, and there is more to come. Sehar will join us next month and finalize her story narrative about her negative experience and where she is today. I know you are moving, so by the time we speak to you, you'll be in a new space, new place, new headspace, new body space.
Everything.
Exactly. So we're looking so forward to having you back on the show. Valerie, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to have you.
Such a pleasure to be here and have these conversations.
Thank you, ladies. Yes, always fun.
Good luck to you, Sehar, on your well-deserved break. My goodness. Your well-deserved break. You enjoy every minute of it.
I will. Thank you, guys.
All right. Thank you.